Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to the Meiji Guillotine Murders by Fūtarō Yamada, translated by Bryan, Karetnyk. The Chief Inspectorate of the Imperial Prosecuting Office. Chapter 1. As great wars and great revolutions reach their end, most nations seem to enter a fallow period, lasting several years. Fallow, F-A-L-L-O-W, left adjective, left untilled or unsown after plowing, fallow. Noun, usually cultivated land that is allowed to lie idle during the growing season, fallow. After such tremendous bloodshed, troubles arising from the victors' arrogance and lust for retribution, as well as from the losers' sense of disgrace and the resentment, will inevitably flare up and prevail over the hour of peace. Yet, still the vantage of history will somehow lend the impression that these years were in some way empty. The period after the Second World War is a case in point, and the early years of the Meiji era too were much the same. Never had there been so nationwide a sense of collapse as there was when the Boshin War ended. But then, nor had there ever been so profound a sense of heartfelt relief at the dawning of peace. It seems, however, that both sides then fell hopelessly into a state of total confusion, with neither one having any idea where to begin or what to do. For the people living then, those years must have seemed anything but fallow. Rather, it must have been a time of great turmoil, of life or death struggle. It was a time when new government offices sprouted up like bamboo shoots, when new administrative orders came down from on high like rain, and when new customs and ideas came flooding in like a deluge from a harbor. By the same stroke, however, it was also a time when even stranger offices, laws, and notions from the old days were revived like the souls of the departed, and combined as though mixing together the 7 colors of the rainbow. Who could say then whether for better or worse, with the end result a chaos of ash grey? This period of chaos cum fallowness seemed to have lasted until around 1873, the 6th year of Emperor Meiji's reign, when the famed Iwakura mission returned from its embassy traveling in the United States and Europe. From the observations made by this group of high-ranking officials, a blueprint was drawn up, one that sought to refashion Japan in Europe's likeness, one that would set her on a course not only to catch up with, but to overtake the West, and one whose consequences would be felt not only in Meiji era, but right up to the Second World War, and even afterwards. In his autobiography, the writer Yukichi Fukuzawa observes, "The years on either side of the Meiji Restoration, from the 2nd or 3rd year of Bunkyu to the 6th or 7th of Meiji, were the most dangerous. During those 12 or 13 years, I never ventured out of my house in Tokyo at night. Lines such as these make clear the extent to which these supposedly fallow years were fallow also in terms of public order. This does not mean, however, that the capital was entirely without law enforcement. In the first year of Meiji, 1868, while the Loyalist army was stationed in Old Edo, the magistrate's office was reformed as a municipal court. Later, the soldiers loyal to the various ruling clans took control of the city, and in the 6th lunar month of the second year, a hired militia was appointed to the role. Finally, by the 11th lunar month of the 4th year, the Rasotsu system was implemented, although the term itself was already in use beforehand. But whatever the name or the system, law enforcement itself was, at any rate, to borrow a phrase from the Kojiki, a tale of when the world was yet young and like unto floating oil, drifting Medusa-like. And so, let us now go back to the autumn of the second year of Meiji. There were once 5 Rasotsu in Tokyo. Rasotsu. Serviceman on patrol. Rasotsu. Serviceman on patrol or policeman, early Meiji era. Rasotsu. Chapter 2. The district of Akashi-cho, where the Tsukiji foreign settlement was located, is bound to the east by the mouth of the great Sumida River, but surrounded on all other sides by canals and waterways. Each of the many bridges there had a guardhouse, and that was where the Rasotsu were stationed. The settlement had been built for the protection of foreign residents, but though guardhouses had been erected, very few foreigners actually availed themselves of them. And so, while in the early days there had been multiple guards stationed in them, now they had just one lone sentry. At his post one afternoon, Sergeant Jiromasa Saruki was having some sport with a drunken man. Actually, it would be more apt to say that the man was sobering up. The foreign settlement, you see, also contained a pleasure quarter, Shin Shimabara. It was open to foreigners, with the women having been brought in from the more famous Yoshiwara. But as with the guardhouses, it was rarely frequented by its intended patrons, and on the whole its clientele was Japanese. The man seemed to be a regular of these establishments. For some reason, though, he had got so drunk that morning that he had been staggering about like a somnambulist. Somnambulism. An abnormal condition of sleep in which motor acts such as walking are performed. Somnambulism. He had been staggering about like a somnambulist. Saruki had brought him in, quote unquote, for his own good. It had been about 11 o'clock in the morning when the man collapsed onto the floor of the guardhouse and fell asleep, snoring dreadfully. He had awoken only moments ago, a little before 4 o'clock that afternoon. As he looked around in confusion, the drunk, who wore the clothes of a merchant, noticed the Rasotsu's monkey-like face with its upward-pointing mustache glaring at him from the desk, and sat up in astonishment. You're in the Karoko Bridge guardhouse in the foreign settlement. You were so drunk that as you were coming over the bridge, you looked as though you might fall over the railing at any moment. So I brought you here. Oh, thank you. What were you doing drunk at such an ungodly hour? Well, you see, I quarreled with one of the working girls and she ran off in the middle of the night. I was so angry that I had one of the young serving lads fetch me some sake, and before I knew it, it was dawn. That's about as much as I can remember. Was I really that drunk? As he bowed and scraped in embarrassment, the man searched furiously inside the breast of his kimono and in the pockets of his sleeves. Look at me, the sergeant barked. Who are you? I need your name, age, address, occupation. Wearing another look of astonishment, the man lifted his head. My name is Shinbei Takaya, he replied, still groping all over his body. I'm 38 and I run a lamp shop in Kotobukicho, in Asakusa. Looking for something? It's just my money. No matter how much I drank, there should still be a fair amount left. It's here. Sergeant Saruki tossed the man's coin purse onto the desk. Chink! I've been keeping it safe for you. Ah, that's awfully kind of you. Thank you, Sergeant. With a show of gratitude, the man picked up his coin purse, chink, and set about inspecting its contents. 1 ryo, 2 ryo, 2 bu, and 1 shu, he said, counting it all out. Then, having satisfied himself, he nodded and prostrated himself in gratitude on the floor. All present and correct. You've been a real help to me, Sergeant. Well, if that's all, he said, getting to his feet. Just 1 minute, said Saruki, stopping him in his tracks. If you'd collapsed like that in the middle of the street, any passerby could have come along and robbed you, taking the whole lot. Thanks to me, you were spared from that injustice. Don't you think you ought to show a bit more gratitude? Oh, but I already... What I mean to say is, thank you. I really am most awfully grateful to you. Come on, do you really think this is the sort of thing that can be repaid with words alone? The lamp seller blinked as he beheld the sergeant's face, his jaw thrust out over the desk. Suddenly, the man's face creased into an awkward smile. I hadn't realized. Of course, I must thank you properly, he said, fumbling around in his coin purse. He extracted a 2-bu gold coin and offered it to the Razotsu. Kindly accept this token of my gratitude, sir. Now, if that's all... It is not! Saruka snarled, thrusting his chin out further still. Think about it. Why, if I hadn't rescued you, you would have fallen off the bridge before you knew it. Is saving your life really worth only 2-bu? The lamp seller panicked. Ah, well, when you put it like that, you can't really put a price on. Don't you think that 3, even 4 coin purses like this would still be nothing compared to a man's life? The lamp seller took a deep breath and looked at the man across from him. But the Razotsu's face was deadly serious, and suddenly a look of irritation flashed in his eyes. A few seconds later, the lamp seller bowed again, so low this time that his forehead practically hit the floor. I really do apologize. It's just as you say, sir. Here, please take the purse and its contents, he said, holding it out in desperation. Saruki snatched it from his hands. Then, as the lamp seller made his way out of the guardhouse, stumbling as he went, as though his drunkenness had suddenly returned to him, the Razotsu called after him in an ingratiating tone. It's a relief in any case to know that everything was all present and correct. The sergeant then tipped out the coins and spread them across the desk. There were gold coins worth 2 bu and silver coins worth 1 bu or 1 shu, all mixed together, just as he had said, 2 ryu, 2 bu, and 1 shu in total. While there was all manner of chaos in those first years of Meiji, this was never truer than where money was concerned. In the previous year, the new government had immediately set about issuing banknotes, but these were hardly in common use. On the other hand, the coins from the old days of the shogunate were still in circulation, but both the values and the denominations of those coins were really quite negligible. And to make matters worse, there were a prodigious number of counterfeits mixed in. Looking back, it seemed miraculous that society didn't just fall apart in those days. One by one, Saruki picked up the coins and dropped them onto the desk, checking whether or not they were counterfeit. Despite the chaos, this was over 2.5 ryu in an era when you could buy a whole sack of rice for 5 ryu and still have change left over. He was thankful not to find a single worthless government bill, and better yet, each of the coins appeared to be genuine article. Each of the coins appeared to be the genuine article. As he listened carefully to the sound of each coin landing on the desk, Sergeant Jiromasa Saruki was in a world of his own, his face ecstatic. But suddenly, he noticed a figure standing in front of the guardhouse, and so he began to gather up the scattered coins in a fluster. Chapter 3. Case closed! The man who had just stepped into the guardhouse was not stationed in the foreign concession, but he was a razotsu. His name was Heikuro Imokawa, and he was an old friend of Saruki's. Imokawa broke into a broad grin, revealing his rodent-like features. I just ran into a man staggering about outside. So, how much did you manage to get out of him? He asked, rubbing his palms and his stubby fingers together. Ugh, you're just like a magpie, said Saruki, clicking his tongue and tossing a 1 shu silver coin onto the desk. Bling, bling, bling. With tremendous dexterity, surprising in one so fat, Sergeant Imokawa took the coin in hand. Pure coincidence! Anyway, I came to tell you that since Icho no Hata seems to be so mysteriously in clover lately, I've been on at him to come to Yoshiwara or Shinshimabara one of these nights. Do you want to come along? You look as though you could do with it. What? Is that all? Saruki spat out with contempt as he covered the money on the desk with his hand, tipped it back into the coin purse, cling, 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 and placed it into his pocket. Zip! All right, fine. Shall we go and see Ichi no Hata then? Are you sure you can leave? The duty officer hasn't come to relieve you yet. Don't worry. Half the time nobody shows up anyway. With that, Saruki picked up his sword in its red lacquered scabbard and, pressing Imokawa ahead of him, left the guardhouse. Heikuro Imokawa gazed out at the many steamers plying the waterways and floating in the blue mouth of the river. As he looked back towards the foreign settlement, his eyes came to rest on a brick building, and he stared up at the exotic-looking tower atop the roof of the Tsukiji Hotel. Is this how everything's going to be in Japan now? He muttered. Saruki chuckled, his monkey-like face creasing into a sneer. What's it to us what happens to the country? True enough, Imokawa replied with a chuckle. They walked off. Jiromasa Saruki was one of slight build, whereas Heikuro Imokawa was thick-set. The two were still wearing their uniforms. The jacket looked like a cross between a modern-day suit and a frock coat, but since it had no buttons, it fastened at the front like a kimono. The trousers, the so-called danbukuro, which looked like swollen elephants' legs, were completely black, but for the waistband of bleached cotton holding them up. This bizarre ensemble was worn together with a sword in a red lacquered scabbard, and crowning the head, an old-fashioned Nirayama-style hat. Not one of the items they wore was in decent condition. While it was still common for policemen to wear straw sandals, Saruki, surprisingly, had on a pair of shoes. They were monstrously large, almost 1.5 times too big for him, and he had purloined them from an imported goods shop in the foreign settlement. Purloin, to appropriate wrongfully and often by a breach of trust. Purloin. Synonyms include boost, filch, heist, hook, lift, misappropriate, nip, pinch, pocket, rip off, snitch, steal, swipe, and thieve. Purloin. And he had purloined them from an imported goods shop in the foreign settlement. To secure them, he tied the laces around his ankles and would go striding off with a triumphant clatter. If nothing else, they at least spared him the cost of straw sandals. So, as the reader has seen, Saruki was the sort of sergeant who enjoyed menacing the general public and extorting money out of them, whereas Imokawa had the habit of sponging off Saruki and others of his disreputable ilk. Whenever his friend came by some easy money, he would always somehow manage to appear out of nowhere. Hence Saruki's earlier complaint that he was like a magpie. It was never his style to threaten. He would just crease his rodent-like face into a broad grin, clap his hands together, and flatter a person so brazenly that nobody could ever be angry with him. What's more, this man had an uncanny nose and could always sniff out petty crimes that promised to be lucrative. Only he would never sully his own hands, having developed instead the habit of entrusting the matters to his colleagues and, no matter the money, taking only a small commission from them. And so it was impossible to escape him. As the pair walked in the direction of Nihonbashi, 3 or 4 strange-looking vehicles crossed their path. I say strange because although these were in fact rickshaws, they had only begun to spring up that summer, and still, curious to the eye, they looked like an odd combination of the old two-wheeled cart with a sort of palanquin set on top. Passing by with cries of joy and laughter, a group of what appeared to be students was speeding towards the Nishi Honganji temple. "What's all this?" Imokawa asked. It's all those spongers who live with that government bigwig Shigenobu Okuma in his mansion by Nishi Honganji, said Saruki, frowning. In the days before the restoration, it belonged to one of the shogun's bannermen, a man by the name of Togawa. But these days, some upstairs in the government are loafing around the place, taking up some rubbish about how they're going to change the world. All argue over cups of sake. They say they're causing such a racket that the neighbors can't sleep, even though the grounds of the mansion are 5,000 tsubo. On the streets, running along the canals, there were many mansions lying empty that had once belonged to various daimyo, or high-ranking samurai. After their inhabitants left for their hometowns or else fled to who knows where, any residents of note had been seized and turned over to the new government or else sold to government officials. Under the shogun, however, some 60% of the land in Edo had belonged to the old samurai clans, so there were mansions that had been left untouched all over the place. Hey, isn't that, said Saruki. In front of the entrance to one mansion in Hachoburi, they spotted a large man shouting, and two of them stopped in their tracks. And the two of them stopped in their tracks. The mansion had previously belonged to a bannerman, but the gate was in ruins, and you could see from the street that the garden inside was overgrown with weeds. I'm a representative of the Grand Council of State, and I have come about the garden. This place has failed its inspection. If you don't open up, this site will be seized immediately. Though he was facing away from them, the man cut an imposing figure, and he was brandishing a wooden notice board in his hand. He's up to something, replied Imokawa. It's Tamonta Onimaru, Saruki muttered. Unsteady on his feet, an old man came hurrying out of the dilapidated entrance and started bowing and scraping before the imposing razotsu. Sergeant Onimaru was tapping on the notice board as he carried on reprimanding him. That summer, the new government had issued a proclamation ordering all owners of mansions with gardens to plant mulberry trees or tea plants immediately. In those days, raw silk and tea were Japan's leading exports, so this was but one example of the heroic efforts the new government was making in the belief that it had to act even if its ideas were in short supply. What's more, it had also threatened to seize any vacant land and gardens that were not being put to good use and had been allowed to go to seed. The notice board bore the words, Crown Property. However, Saruki and Imokawa were well aware that Sergeant Onimaru had written those words himself. Before long, having extracted from the old man a certain sum to overlook the incident, Sergeant Onimaru came out of the front entrance, notice board in hand, and scowled when he spotted the two other gentlemen. His bearded face was fearsome to behold. They both held out their hands. Eventually, still scowling, Sergeant Onimaru opened the envelope and handed them 1 ryo each. How many places have you been to? Asked Imokawa. And just where are the pair of you going? He fired back without answering the question. Where indeed? We're on our way to Denmacho to see Sohachi Ichinohata, Saruki replied. When Saruki informed Onimaru that Ichinohata had, it seemed, latterly found himself a nice little source of income, he said, Why don't I join you? I haven't seen Sohachi's face in a long time. In a long while. With a nod, he snapped the homemade notice board in half with his foot and tossed it into the gutter, clunk clunk, at the bottom of the mansion wall. And so the three of them set off together. As they were about to cross the Edo-bashi bridge, Imokawa suddenly looked around. I wonder, he said, twisting his neck. What is it? Onimaru asked. You see that samurai walking over there? The one in the Fuka Amigasa hat? Look! He stopped dead in his tracks. A few paces behind them, just as he said, there was a man wearing a black-crested haori jacket and a pair of hakama, with a large straw hat covering his face, trying to light his pipe with a match. He's not been following us, has he? Why would you think that? He's been following me ever since the end of summer. I don't know about before that, but I've a feeling that I've seen him 4, maybe 5 times since then. I don't involve myself in nefarious dealings like you two, though, so I can't think why anyone would want to follow me. There's nobody with a grudge against me, said Imokawa. What on earth are you about? What on earth are you on about? Do either of you recognize him? I don't. No. That being said, it's an outrage that anybody should be following an officer of the law. Right, I'll arrest him and find out, said Onimaru, ready to turn on his heels when Imokawa quickly stopped him. Wait, he looks strong. I have a feeling that you're about to kick a hornet's nest. Besides, I could be wrong about this. He's gone! After wasting 3 or 4 matches in the wind, the man in the straw hat, trailing behind him at least a cloud of blue smoke, had leisurely strolled off, disappearing into an alleyway. He did not seem to be aware of them, so unhurried were his steps. The 3 men proceeded to cross the Edo-bashi bridge. The area was full of merchants' homes and shops, so the crowds of people were no different from what they had been in the years before the Restoration. In fact, there were no fallow days for those people who had to work in order to survive. There was one sight that did differ from before, however. By the sides of the main thoroughfare, there were people spreading out rugs and woven mats, laying out furniture, swords, dolls, clothes, all manner of things. Mostly, their heads were covered with braided straw hats or the head scarves known as okosu zukin. And they didn't call out to passers-by, but instead just sat motionlessly, their heads bowed, or else with both hands pressed to the ground in supplication. Even though the bright autumn sun was streaming down, they looked like a host of shadows, having lost their stipends in the collapse of the previous government. Having lost their stipends in the collapse of the previous government, these samurai families had no idea how to survive in the new world in which they found themselves. Ugh, here we go, said Imokawa in a strange voice. Is that Heisuke Yokomakura? Said Saruki, glancing over at the street corner. The front of the little place was only 10 feet wide, and on the half-open sliding door was written, Greater Denmacho Police Station. In days past, it would have been called a lockup. Behind it, they could just see the head of a lone sergeant. It was none other than the long face of their friend, Heisuke Yokomakuru. But in front of him, with his head back to them, there was a man wearing a samurai's top knot. His head bowed, and beside him what appeared to be girl of 16 or 17, perhaps his daughter, who was cupping her face in both hands and appeared to be crying. When Sergeant Yoko Makura noticed the three of them approaching, he said in a loud voice, "Very well, I'll overlook it this time. Now be off with you." When the man turned towards them, the three spotted that he was holding a half-folded fan. They surmised that he must have just given some money to Yoko Makura, observing the old custom of offering it on the object. The graying, refined, but somewhat frail-looking man and the girl who appeared to be his daughter went trotting out of the police station. "What was all that about?" inquired Sergeant Saruki. "Oh," said Yoko Makura, rubbing his long face in irritation as though regretting having just raised his voice. "It's a father and daughter who run a shop over there on the main thoroughfare. I just happened to be passing by and heard her disparaging the new government, so I dragged her off. Since her father came to make amends, though, I let her off the hook." "How much did it cost him?" asked Imokawa. "2 bu," said Yoko Makura, extracting the coins from his pocket and showing them. Shing! Apparently, that was all he had. It hardly seems worth the trouble. "But you do this several times a day, surely?" "That was my first of the day. Anyway, who would want to be a rasotsu if it weren't for little bonuses like that?" said Yoko Makura, smirking unashamedly. "Oh, I would. I'm a servant of the people." By nature, Imokawa was, of course, a tremendously lazy man, feeling little inclined to demand a cut of only 2 bu. The three of them, each wearing a wry smile, turned to leave the police station. But Yoko Makura called after them, stopping them in their tracks. When he asked after Sohachi Ichinohata, it was decided that he, too, should accompany them, although this would leave nobody manning the police station. He did not seem to mind in the slightest. And so it was that the group of 3 became a group of 4. Together they set out for Kodenma Cho, joking and talking loudly, oblivious to the world around them.